Welcome to Pod Academy, an international podcast that explores topics like history, politics, science, psychoanalysis, and more through movies and TV shows. And I'd like to thank today Jan Pieter Ross, Max Blum, and Michel Dale for being supporters of the show. Thanks, guys. We've posted on the YouTube channel that spawned this podcast, God Academy, literally hundreds of videos about A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones and history. We've explored all kinds of historical events and themes through this history-rich story. Well, after all those videos and discussions, we have a brand new historical take about the story. We're going to find as many similarities as we can between the first part of the story and the Interbellum period, the period between the two world wars of the 20th century.
This is Sparta!
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Das war ein Befehl! Der Angriff war Befehl!
What we doing live echoes in eternity.
All right, but apart from the sanitation, the medicine, education, wine, public order, irrigation, roads, a freshwater system, and public health, what have the Romans ever done for us?
Hi, everybody. Hello, Rutger. How are you doing, Rutger?
Good. How are you doing, Gil Kidron, my partner in crime?
Yes, my name is Gil Kidron. I forget to say thank you for mentioning it. I'm doing okay. I don't know. Things are, for the first time in I don't know how many years, things are interesting in Israel and not in a depressing way. So this is a good development. And we might be in our own interbellum period here and not knowing that disaster is looming, because in Game of Thrones, The Song of Ice and Fire, there's this threat that is building up and nobody seems to do anything about it.
Or you might be in an interregnum.
Ooh, which is?
A period between two kings when the throne is vacant.
Regnum, right. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Okay, so when you look at the story through this specific perspective, that there was the Robert's Rebellion and all the carnage and damage that was done after that, there were no real good guys, no real bad guys in this war, as we learn later on. But the ruling elite seems to have a lack of political will to do anything to prepare for the threats ahead, be them the rise of the White Walkers / others, like the rise of fascism, or even the problems within their own kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this has many parallels in history, and to illustrate these parallels and to also assure our listeners that we spare no expense for the Academy, today I'm reporting from a special location.
That is relevant?
Yeah, it's very, very relevant. Today I'm coming to you live from, not live, from Freiburg im Breisgau, which is in the south of Germany.
Okay.
But I normally am not from there. I'm from the Netherlands, specifically from Holland, so the western part of the country. And yesterday I drove here, and I drove past a bunch of historical sites that actually are also marked along the road as being related to the Interbellum and to the preparations that people were making at the time. I mean, an interbellum is a really weird historical period, right? Like other periods, you know that you are living through one. Like, you know, when you're in a crisis or in a boom period or whatever. An interbellum, we know afterwards that it's a period that's bookended by two wars. Once, when you're inside one, it's just the mindfuck of, are we in one or not? Is there a next war coming? And of course you'd like to be in denial for as long as possible, because well, I guess there's usually two sides, right? There's the side who's planning to take the other ones into a war, and the setting up the casus belli, and they probably want to conceal what they're doing for as long as possible because they're building up, right? And the other side, well, they don't really, they don't want to believe that, oh, here we go again. And also they don't want to give the others cause. So you get this long period where there's kind of let's not really put it into words. And for example, there was this period when in Europe, Hitler was in power, but he hadn't done anything yet. And so other countries were supposed to kind of act like, well, this is Germany, this is our neighbors, and let's not insult them, right? Let's go to the Olympics.
Yeah. And they do have some points. They did have some fair points.
Well, exactly. I mean, like it's all what you're always then in an interbellum, in the aftermath of the previous war, and of course in the previous war there's been aggrieved parties who have maybe somewhat legitimate complaints. And maybe Germany even did. I mean, the Versailles Treaty was pretty brutal. And then you're in this period, and what always happens is that, you're always preparing to refight the previous war, right? All the preparations are for the last war. And of course, that's how things go wrong, because the next war is not going to be exactly like the last one. And that's where things go haywire. And that's what I actually saw along my road trip as I was, of course, researching for this episode.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to go back a little bit to the story. So we see it's very apparent, let's say, from Tyrion's point of view in the first book, in the first season, Ned, Tywin later on, that they don't really want to hear facts that will have to make them accept the fact that there is a real and grave danger coming in. Because once you accept it, then you commit yourself. If you say that this party, not party as in political party, whatever, just any party, they are growing in strength and threatening us, and the complacency of peace can be a danger. Basically, I'm going to rephrase. Basically, it means that the peace is temporary, and you should act and prepare for war. People don't like preparing for wars. Wars are difficult. Wars are hard. The First World War was the hardest war ever fought up to that point. Decimated entire nations. Like 10%, I think, of the male population of France, and something close to that in Britain. And they tried, okay, let's go for disarmament, which makes sense. Let's not do the same mistakes that we did before, right? Going and arming ourselves to the teeth and then going into this war blindly. No. Let's learn from that mistake, and that goes to your point of relitigating the previous war that is not going to come back the same way. And I also kind of found like a little nice similarities between, Robert Baratheon, the way that he handled himself, and like the Roaring Twenties. Getting drunk, paying, borrowing money from everybody. It's just free money, everything will be fine. Even though he was actually the only one, the biggest fool was the only one who was saying a war is coming. We need, something will go down. Maybe that's why he was drinking and whoring, just to forget.
So someone else who was also drinking, not so much whoring, and eternally warning for war, was somebody who at first wasn't all that popular in Britain, namely Churchill, right?
I never heard.
That guy with the drinks and the cigars. But Churchill just liked a good war. First of all, that's true. Right? He had been in charge of the Admiralty, I guess, in the First World War, and he had fought in the Sudan, and he liked shooting at people.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, and so at first, like, he was one of the ones who kind of supposedly saw the gathering storm. But this is another thing that is sort of in the discourse of when wars maybe start appearing on the horizon, right? There's the war party who maybe even want it, and then there's the others who don't want it, and you're not quite sure who's right, this is also what we saw with the war in Iraq. Basically, the argument was, well, we are now living in an interbellum where at some point Iraq will attack us with weapons. Oh, and they have these weapons and they're coming, and now we have to strike first, right? That's basically the first strike argument, which has appeared at numerous occasions in history. And I guess we were on the side of, well, maybe we should not go to war because maybe the threat isn't so real. And in this case, I think we were right, and maybe the war in Iraq should not have happened. But in the 1930s, Churchill was right, and the whole appeasement obviously didn't work. I mean, that was just a temporary reprieve.
But the ones who were wrong, who were most wrong, who were really wrong, weren't people like us. Were people in his own party, mostly people in his own party, other conservative politicians who some of them maybe had some, affinity towards, fascism and Nazism. And even though Churchill, he led the way in that regard, 10, 20, 30 years ago, before that, he was not really that much less racist than Hitler. Just like for another reason, I just went through things that he said. And you wouldn't know if it was Hitler or Churchill if you just read them out of context. Just the most vile, racist, murderous shit ever. So I'm kind of I'm not really in the mood to give him too much credit for anything. Even also, I saw some polls in current day U.S., France, and the UK. So in the US, and they ask everybody who did the most to stop the Nazis. So in France, back in the 50s, it was most people said the USSR. Now most people say the Americans, and 5-8% say the British. Mm-hmm. The same in the US, and the British are the only ones who think that they did the most to stop the Nazis. I guess because he did give some really good speeches. And that it's like Gorbachev, take down that wall, boom. Mm-hmm. That's step one. Step two, wall comes down. Called it, confirmed.
Well, but just to really quickly appease our British listeners, in all fairness, they stood alone for quite a bit, right? There was sure there was still the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in effect. The US
they have an island. It's easier when you have an island.
Yes, but they fought bravely. They died on our soil. Just soil. No disrespect here. Just rule Britannia. Britannia rules the waves. British will never be slaves. Okay.
Okay, I'm retracting it.
We're losing listeners otherwise. Soviet Union also very nice. America also, yay.
Again, I think now we're losing.
Patreon.com/Pod Academy for our American listeners.
Yeah, let's cut out the irrelevant parts and just post them regionally.
Yeah, exactly. Just local content. Yeah.
So basically, Churchill was saying, winter is coming.
Yes.
Other people were saying, come on, this is just words and you're just pessimistic.
You're hawkish, yes.
And hawkish.
You're the war party, yes.
Yes. And what do you think about that? So one of the themes of the interbellum period after the First World War, before the Second World War, was the start of the receding of imperialism.
Yes.
So maybe we could say, if we tie it back to the story, the fall of the Targaryen dynasty, which was basically an imperial affair. They came from the outside. Okay, so there was autonomous regions and stuff. But once there wasn't that empire based on dragons and mostly based on the memory of dragons, then that allowed several factions. I guess that hurt the cohesion and the possibility to work together, which we saw that also in the interbellum period, when mostly Britain and France, they pushed for disarmament and appeasement, while other places who were closer to the danger were like, no, could you help us out? Please, the White Walkers are coming.
Oh, absolutely. And actually there is also a parallel in that, in the sense that the First World War was this period where basically all the great land empires came to an end, right? There were still colonial empires overseas, but Austria-Hungary broke into pieces. The German Empire that became a republic and was made smaller. The Tsar gone, the Chinese Emperor gone, Ottoman Empire gone. And large parts of these empires were also much more fragmented now, and especially sort of in Central Eastern Europe, there was a bunch of these smaller countries now, like Czechoslovakia, like Hungary, Romania, and so on, which of course, felt threatened and tried to navigate that new situation. And for example, like Czechoslovakia first tried to resist, and then they were just fed to the lion. Basically, that first Sudetenland was ceded, and then Czechia was basically just made into this Gau, and then Slovakia had to collaborate, and the same sort of Hungary kind of. Under Horthy, more chose that side, and in Romania also there was a very strong collaborationist factions, because what they were, I guess between a rock and a hard place, right? Like there's this recent book called Bloodlands, which is about this whole region, basically between Germany and Russia, which were just between the hammer and the anvil, and just. Experience this carnage from both sides, and what are you supposed to do then, right?
Yeah. In Britain, it was more apparent that the people who were more against preparing for war were the elites, like the House of Lords versus the House of Commons. So, like when you have things to lose, when your life is comfortable, if we go again, Tyrion saying, "Oh, grumpkins and snarks and everything that's going on there beyond the wall, that's so silly. It's just stories." Oh, and how about that? Comparing the failure of the League of Nations to the failure of the Small Council to prepare a united, front or cohesion or anything.
And of course, like the wall in A Song of Ice and Fire is entirely modeled on Hadrian's Wall in Britain. So that was like a defensive line that was kind of held, but really not really held. Like it was more just like that was a tour of duty that people may have to do from elsewhere in the empire and live there in near Scotland. In the rain for way too long, very depressing. Okay. But at least they could have wives and so on, and the deal also ended. But there's been a lot of these examples, and what's interesting is that more often than not, in the end, the thing doesn't fall because there's a full frontal attack and it falls, but it just has outlived its purpose. And
it doesn't help.
Something else helps. And this is actually
you're
what
referring
I saw
to the Maginot Line, right?
Sorry?
You're referring to the Maginot Line?
Well, so this is some stuff that I saw during my road trip. So there's actually two of these defensive structures that I drove past. So one of them is in the Netherlands. And so I pointed out previously that I live in Holland, which is the western part, and then the Netherlands is the entire country. There's a bunch of other provinces. So what the Netherlands did as a defensive posture in like the 16th, 17th, 18th century was what's called the waterline, which is so there's these areas that are below sea level, kind of between Holland and the eastern part of the country. And you can flood those areas, and then Holland becomes somewhat of an island, or there's only a couple of raised roads which are more easily defended. And you do that, and then you can keep the attackers out. And that has worked a bunch of times quite well. It was also attempted during sort of the French time, right, when the French Revolution and the French came also into the Netherlands in kind of weird power
to liberate you.
Yeah, it's kind of complicated. But anyway, there already the waterline didn't work so well because there was really, really cold winter. And what happened was there was this one case in the entire history where a cavalry regiment, French cavalry, could capture a fleet, a navy. The Dutch Navy was at anchor and frozen solid. And so then on horseback they could seize the fleet. No. So there the waterline already didn't work so well. But then when the Second World War was really coming, the waterline was attempted again. And there's like these photos of people sort of standing in boots in water, waiting for the Wehrmacht to come. And there was this idea, well, this might slow them down a little bit. And I guess it must have looked really interesting for the Luftwaffe pilots flying over it. But the waterline didn't work so well. So that was one thing. And actually, when you drive out of Holland, sort of eastbound or more south, you come by these places where there's road signs that point them out, like, oh, this is where it was. Now, another one that you also drive by, and this is much further south, right? So I drove to Freiburg, which is almost near the Swiss border with Germany and near France. You drive through this whole area, which is now Alsace, of course, the Alsace. There you also see these signs along the road that are pointing towards the Maginot Line. And so here you can also see, of course, this is what the French built in preparation for fighting the First World War again. And this time we'll get it right. So we built these massive defensive structures because they'd learned in the First World War that the Germans were good engineers and they had built really nice trenches for their side. And the French and the British were kind of standing in the mud. So now the French thought, okay, this time we'll get those fuckers and we'll build really nice trenches and we'll sit there and we'll hold them up. Of course, that also didn't work where, you know, in the waterline, the Luftwaffe flew over it. And for the Maginot Line, well, they just went around it. So again, that didn't really work. But in the end, of course, what's interesting about this is that even though they'd prepared for the previous war and, of course, all their preparations had not really done much, they still came out ahead because what was also interesting during my road trip is that you then drive through this whole part of France where, I mean, technically it's France, but all the place names are just German names, and you drive by Strasbourg, right, which is obviously not a French word. And in the end, I guess it resolved itself in a totally different situation because now Strasbourg is, I guess, one of the European capitals. And so this whole battlefield between the German world and French or Romance world, the Rhine Valley and sort of those frontier that continuously has been shifting, is now the center of a much larger European Union. And at least in the foreseeable future, I don't expect their armies to be marching there. By the way, let me close with a joke. So when you drive there through the French countryside, you drive along these roads, and all the roads are lined with trees. Do you know why there's all the trees there?
No.
This is so that the Germans can march in the shade.
Did you come up with that joke, or is it a joke?
Yeah, it's a joke.
It's a recurring joke. Okay. So it's a known joke.
But France is a very nice country, nice food. That's French listeners, we like them too. Patreon.com/Pod Academy. Well, yeah, something that we haven't talked about at all is how, of course, in The Lord of the Rings, there's also the same kind of situation of the gathering storm, right? Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, here the kind of the premise, at least in the beginning, is that basically Hitler is dead, or is he?
We don't know. Maybe he's hiding in Peru.
Exactly.
Or something.
Yes.
Or Bolivia, or wherever it is. Right. And people don't want to accept that the challenge is coming. It's interesting that he wrote that about the First World War before the Second World War. Wow, actually anticipating that in some ways. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then the ring
like
in the Fires of Mount Doom, that's Hiroshima.
Oh no, he shouldn't have thrown it then.
Well, not the second one. He should have only thrown the first ring.
Ah, yeah, at the beginning.
Yeah.
The beginning of the movie.
To make a statement. Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe just throw it near it.
Yeah, just to see how powerful it is. Yes.
Just watch, and now you understand.
Yeah.
Next time I'll throw it.
Surrender.
Okay, so let me look at my notes. So during peacetime, right, you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to spend political capital and actual capital on preparing for war because you have other things that you prefer doing. You want to believe, it's very human to believe that disaster is not coming. And like in the interbellum period, okay, so you have the rise of fascism. Let's say that that's the White Walkers for the sake of argument, and the rise of communism. I'm stretching it a little bit. That could be the Brotherhood without banners. They don't have ranks so much. It's more egalitarian. They're fighting for like universal justice, global justice, not just for this house or that house. And at the end, we're going by the show and whatever, season 7, season 8, like when Cersei says that she doesn't want to go and fight the fascists, the White Walkers, they're like, you know what, I don't like them, but at least they'll kill all the communists, the northern people and stuff. They'll kill my enemies, my bigger enemies, so That was also one of the things that allowed the Nazis to operate, because they were seen as like the buffer between Western Europe and those evil communists. And that didn't work out as planned. Yada, yada, yada. Communists are better than fascists. Yada, yada, yada. Here we are. Okay, so let's wrap it up. Also, I'll use some of this in our upcoming video on the YouTube channel about Tyrion's third chapter. There's a lot of interbellum stuff. I'll use some of that. And Rutger, so we want to tell the people a little bit about our upcoming projects and episodes.
Absolutely, yes. So I will be striking out on some collaborations or matchups that you haven't heard yet. So one of them is that I am going to record a podcast with Noga about...
Dr. Noga, please.
Sorry, yeah. So now there's going to be two doctors, one podcast. And this is going to be about the origin of consciousness in the breakdown of the bicameral mind. Through Westworld... and the movie Troy, and some obscure books and some psychoanalysis. So this will be very interesting, and I'm very excited. We've been doing, I guess, more lengthy preparation, but because it's a very complex subject. But we think it'll be great.
You wanted to do that for 3 years or something?
For ages, yes. But now it's going to happen. And I will also do another matchup that you haven't heard yet. I will be recording a podcast with Mallory, our linguist.
Behind my back?
Yes. About Germany, about Deutschland. And here the anchors for the conversation will be, first of all, the music video for the song Deutschland by Rammstein. Secondly, the series Dark, which
very
is
popular
on Netflix right now.
Highly regarded.
Very popular. And thirdly... Oh, yes. And thirdly, about the series How to Sell Drugs Online, which is also a German series on Netflix, which
Sounds
is kind of cool and funny. And we'll probably weave in some other things as well. We're both very fascinated about East Germany, so maybe Goodbye Lenin or Das Leben der Anderen, or something like that. But that'll be fun. So that's at least two things coming up. And Gil will tell us about other stuff that's happening as well.
What you and I have come. Okay, first of all, I have also a new collaboration. It's actually the second time I'm going to collaborate with our dear longtime patron Anke, also Dutch. We're going to talk about the European countryside in movies. And it was the idea came up because her dissertation is about how the romanticization of the Dutch countryside in movies in this era of globalization is actually increasing tensions between urban centers and rural centers. And so we watched Hot Fuzz, British countryside, Celesti, like Welcome to the Sticks, the most successful French movie of all time about the French countryside, and already you see all the cliches there of the townspeople and the village people. This is a historical tension that has been here for thousands of years. People from the villages and people from the big cities, whatever. So, but we're looking at contemporary Europe. It's going to be a lot of fun. We also have an Italian movie and maybe a German or Austrian movie. And you and I, we want to do China in movies. Boom. That's going to be mostly a historical outlook, right? We're going to put it in the history in movies, I think. Cabinet.
Yeah, I think we both really enjoyed thinking a little bit about, what is the context of The Last Emperor when we did the Revolutions part. But we have to do a lot more and try to understand the Middle Kingdom a bit better.
Once we look at, Hero and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and you see how much culture there is there, and then you end up with The Last Emperor, where this Chineseness is erased. Actually, that's going to be very, powerful, I think. And we also want to do human-animal hybrids as our next science installment.
It's going to be a little bit body horror, so it's going to be difficult for you to watch, but I like it.
Yeah, I started watching it. It's difficult. It's already difficult. It's already been difficult. But I'm going to do everything for the job. For the job.
Yes, we sacrifice for the academy.
Yes, I also want to do research in Europe for something. Why am I not getting a check from the academy to go and research?
You're not?
Who's handling all the business? Okay. So let's leave it here. I think we should also do an interbellum period in movies podcast. Okay, so thank you everybody for tuning in. Check out our website at ourpodacademy.com if you want to send us an email about this episode or whatever episode it is. If you have an idea, a thought, a criticism, you want to tell us you like what we do, you can email us at ourpodacademy.com. Us@ourpodacademy.com. We want to thank our patrons. So thank you, Rutger, and we'll see each other soon, right, in one of our upcoming collaborations. But we might take 1 week off in August. We're not sure yet. We're trying to have everything ready. We might have 1 week off. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.